And yeah, great. So first off, welcome everyone. Welcome to the consulting bootcamp organized by 180TC IIT Madras jointly with Relay Campus. First off, thank you for sort of spending your Saturday evening with us. We are sort of delighted to have you on board. So the main intention of the consulting bootcamp is to sort of just give you a flavor of what it means to get started on the consulting process, the consulting interview process to be precise. So essentially for the session, we've divided into four modules. The first module would be a quick introduction about the event, the panelists, and about consulting in specific. We'll go over the key aspects of the consultant's toolkit and sort of delivered by our partner Relay Campus, and Satya will be doing that. Post that, the second module would be the panel discussion, where we have two components again. We'll have couple of pre-decided questions, and we'll also have an Ask Me Anything where our link will be put up on Mentimeter, and you can sort of start pushing your questions, and our panelists will be happy to answer. The third part of the session would probably be the most awaited, where you sort of get divided into breakout rooms, and the panelist itself will sort of guide you on what it means to be a part of a case interview. And finally, we have a sort of conclusion where we sort of go over the key learnings and we sort of end there. So once again, a warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for being here. And yeah, be happy to start. Satya, can you move? Perfect. So before we begin, sort of quick intro to 180DC. I'd like my colleague Mayur to.
Thanks, Dhruv, for that introduction. So before we get started, a bit about our organization, 180DC IIT Madras. 180DC is the world's largest student consultancy, working with social organizations and creating impact across the globe. 180DC essentially bridges the gap between students from top universities and socially conscious organizations who are looking forward to create impact. The IIT Madras branch of 180DC was established in 2017, and since then we have worked with over 20 organizations over the years, including some prime organizations like Bhumi, Government of Tamil Nadu, and new startups like AI for Bharat and TagHi. 180DC IIT Madras has also become the hub of all the consulting activities on our campus. So that's a bit about the organizer 180DC IIT Madras. Now I would like to hand it over to Satya to talk about our content partner, Relay Campus. Over to you.
Hey guys, thanks Dhruv and Mayur for having me. I have fond memories about 180DC. It was me and a couple of my friends back in 2017 when we were in college when we set this up. So it's really nice to see this scale up so well. Coming to me, I graduated from IIT Madras a couple of years ago and worked in Dalberg, a social impact consulting firm. I'm currently working at Kona Capital, which is a global fintech VC, and I lead their Asia investments, especially in Indonesia and Philippines. So Relay Campus was an initiative that we launched last year. And this is primarily because me and few of my friends find meaning in mentorship and coaching. And we also value the role of peers in learning. So if you had to say what Relay Campus is, everything you need to land your dream job. We are currently in consulting and product management. We hope to sort of move to other domains as well. A few statistics on the screen, but hope to deliver more than statistics here. Handing it back to Mayur and Dhruv again.
Right. Thank you so much, Satya. So I think a part of the session when we're talking about consulting, instead of sort of just giving you information off the internet, we sort of want to present a little more distilled, tried and tested tips. And to enable this, sort of put together a dream team, so to speak, of the current MBB cohort for 2020 and sort of handpicked and curated people from different walks of life and different backgrounds. So that you're able to get tips which you can land your dream job, right? So starting off, to introduce the panelists, I am joined by Shweta, Vasanta, and Subhashri, and we'll be sort of representing the McKinsey cohort in this respect. Moving on, Satya. Next, from the BCG cohort, we are joined by Mayur, Nikunj, Kritika, and Adarsh. Warm welcome to you. Moving on. And finally, from Bain, we have Nandini, Aditya, Ayushi, and Sanjay. A warm welcome to you guys as well. So thank you so much, panelists, for sort of taking all the time. I'm sure we can make the participants' time worth it. Perfect. Let's move forward.
All right, guys. So let's get started. So just wanted to take a first principles approach like all consultants would. So what exactly is consulting? I ended up Googling this term, and it's essentially the activity of giving expert advice about any particular subject. Uh, and that is a very vague definition. But if you look on the right hand side, there are different types of consulting. So you have your Infosys, TCS, etc., which are your technology consultants. Then you have doctors who are medical consultants. I'm sure a lot of the professors do academic consulting, and all your EY, Deloitte, etc., do tax consulting. But in this session, we'll focus on management and strategy consulting. Uh, so what exactly is management and strategy consulting? So if I have to put it in layman terms, a management consultant is like a doctor to your CEO or your organization. A doctor solves any problems that we have on health wise. Management consultant solves business problems of a CEO or an organization. So what are these problems, right? So here's a list of a few problems. So what are the new products an organization should launch? Should I acquire a new company? How do I grow my customers? How do I reduce my costs to drive profits? So these are certain problems that management consultants help the CEO to answer. Now, an important question that you might have is, well, if consultants are doing this, then what does a CEO do? Because it looks like the job of a CEO is to do all of this, which is where the job of a consultant becomes even more interesting. The problems that come to a management consultant are the ones that can't be solved by a CEO using their own experience of 20 years or using their own talent pool. Uh, so sort of highlighted why it's exciting, but just wanted to say why is it so hyped, right? As I said, like you would be working for the CEO of an external organization. So you would essentially be working with the top.
Is it a little buffering for Satya?
Yeah.
Cool. So great. So we'll just give him a couple of moments. So while that happens, I don't mind sharing the screen and hold on.
Hey, Dhruv, I'm back.
Oh, perfect, Satya. Yeah, take over.
I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah, I think it just dropped off, but fair. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I was just saying why consulting is so hype. You just work with the best people, be it within the consulting organization or with your clients outside. You work with the management, you work with the CEOs. The second important aspect I wanted to highlight was that you get exposed to a breadth of sectors at a very young age. So I'm sure a lot of people, including me, have no idea what I'm interested in or what I'm good at. So just being in consulting, just getting exposed to different sectors helps you figure out what you really want to do. Whether you want to say continue in manufacturing, whether you want to say continue in airline industry, etc. So you just get exposed to a breadth of sectors at very young age. The third point, which we will get to in detail in a bit, is that you will actually develop a very unique way of thinking about business problems, which will lead to your fourth main point is that you get a very lucrative exit opportunities, be it working in a CEO's office of a large organization, be it working with VCs, be it going for the top business schools, because all of these kind of elite organizations value this highly unique way of thinking, which we'll get to. And of course, there is the travel aspect as well, which has been a bit dull in the past year, but that's also a huge value prop for consulting. Right. So all this said and done, before just jumping into something that is really great, you just have to figure out, is it really for me, right? Uh, and based on my experience of 2 years, it is for you if you like challenges and love solving complex problems. As I said, like CEO is not able to figure that out himself, and that's why they are paying $1 million for you folks to work for over 4 weeks essentially to solve that problem. So if you like that challenge, then this is definitely the place for you to start off your career with. Most of what consultants do involves speaking with a lot of people on a daily basis. So you'll be traveling to different places. You'll be doing interviews with a lot of folks. So if you're a people person, if you just love vibing with new people, this is definitely the job for you. It's not a desk job. And the third aspect is that you love to be a generalist. in the sense that you want to gain breadth of knowledge across different sectors and not the depth. So if these are your traits, then this is the perfect place for you. Wanted to also highlight uh, it, that management consulting might not be for you if you actually want to go deep into one field, or if you actually thrive scientific, academic, and technical aspects. So if you say want to work on the technical end of in Boeing as opposed to working on the business end, you should not consider management consulting. The third very important aspect is that uh, management consultants at the end of the day don't have a skin in the game, right? So they just give an advice to the CEO. It's the CEO who has to go and actually implement it. So if you drive for implementation and execution, maybe management consulting is not for you. So there's a meme that I found on the right hand side. So you give your strategy, but the client implementation might be a bit off. So if you thrive for implementation, maybe this is not for you. Okay, quickly moving on. All this said and done. So how do these management consultants act? So let me tell you what management consultants pitch to their clients, right? So they just pitch that we'll give you the best talent to work on your most hardest problems. So people are the most important asset for any consulting firm. That's the reason why they are after the best talent. So typically the process involves two steps. One is your selective resume shortlisting and the case interviews. We'll get into each of them in detail. But just wanted to give a brief intro about case interviews. Right. Like all of you guys are entering into your fourth or fifth year, and I'm sure you guys have done internships, gone in, already have had your first interview experiences with companies. So case interview is very, very different from typical interviews that you might have faced. Firstly, it's not an interview. At the core, it's a brainstorming session that you have with your interviewer. So in normal interviews, the interviewer is looking to eliminate you and sort of judging you on that basis. Whereas in a case interview, the interviewer is almost on your side. They are just trying to help you get to an answer and see how you perform on that kind of a scenario. So don't treat it as an interview. It's a brainstorming session at its core. So what is this brainstorming session about, right? So typically the interviewer would give you a problem or a case that he or she is already working in, which would be a 4 or 5 month project, but they would sort of condense it into a 30-minute discussion for you to engage on. The discussion essentially is simulated to understand how you would perform when placed in front of a client on day one. So if you are placed to solve that problem in their place, what would you do? The other thing that they are sort of wanting to understand is that, can I work with this person during the most toughest times? So it's very important to have a good discussion with the interviewer and demonstrate how you think about solving a problem. So the goal is not about finding a solution to a problem or a case. So you can't expect to find solution to a problem or a case in 30 minutes when they aren't able to solve it in 5 months, or when they are getting paid $1 million over 5 months. The goal is to actually have a good conversation during the interview. So quickly to summarize, it's not an interview, it's a discussion. The goal should be to have a good discussion with the interviewer so that he or she can see working with you. And you demonstrate that you are client ready from day one. We'll get to what client ready is, but just wanted to highlight that. Right. So what exactly is being tested, right? And then, I mean, if you ask a lot of people, it's just you get a lot of information on the internet or from your seniors, etc. But you can bucket the criteria for case interviews into 4 main parameters. You have your structured thinking, you have your business acumen, you have your quantitative ability, and your communications and presence. We'll go deeply into structured thinking, but quickly summarizing the other 3. So business acumen, at the end of the day, you are giving an advice to a CEO, right? You have to have some amount of judgment, some amount of business insights on top of just having your quant and communication. So that is on business acumen. On the quantitative ability, everything in the business world, every decision in the business world happens based on numbers. So you have to be really, really strong on numbers. The third, communication and presence, is really important because you have to have clarity of thought when you communicate to a CEO. You are speaking to a 50-year-old CEO. You can't just go and tell that, oh, just do this, right? You have to speak in a way that you convince that CEO. So all of these aspects are also important, which are tested in a case interview. So business acumen, quantitative ability, communication presence, though they might seem new, these are something that you can pick up easily. But structured thinking is something that is the most important aspect. And it's also something that you guys have not been exposed to. So we thought, let's take this time to just dive into structured thinking a bit more. So I didn't want to give a definition for structured thinking, which is why I thought let's understand structured thinking with an example. And this was a question that I wanted to answer with you folks. So any volunteers who would want to answer this question, like how would you solve Bangalore's road traffic problem? In a couple of lines, if you can. Any takers? Maybe one of the panelists. Okay. Our panelists are actually not normal people, but anyways. Okay. So if I ask you this question randomly, hey Ankit, go ahead. Hey Achint, go ahead.
Only panelists can unmute and speak.
Okay, cool. Okay, sure. Let me, sorry about that. I think only panelists are allowed to speak. Cool. So if I ask this question to you randomly in a hallway, right? Like we are passing by and I just happen to ask this question to you. I might get a lot of these responses. Apply the odd even rule, construct flyovers, encourage people to use public transport, etc. These are all good answers. It's not like they're not good answers, but this is how I would say a normal person would answer. But if you look at how a consultant would answer this, they would say that, okay, Bangalore's traffic problem can be bucketed down into two broad aspects. One is you reduce demand for road travel or you increase capacity to handle traffic. And for under each of this, there can be subdivisions of how you can do that. So you can either reduce usage of cars, you can promote alternatives to cars, right? Or you can improve efficiency of existing capacity, or you can build new capacity. So essentially, this is a very structured way of thinking, right? Instead of just having bunch of bubbles flowing in front of you on how to answer this problem, this is a very structured way to think about the problem. So you have your you can essentially bucket all your solutions across these sort of things, and it makes it very easy to understand a very complex kind of a problem. So what was the difference between these two approaches, like between a normal person and a consultant? The answer is structured thinking. So structured thinking is the art of breaking down a problem into smaller, easy to understand problems. So I've broken down the road traffic problem into two sub-problems, whether it's your reduced demand for travel or increased capacity to handle traffic. And then I've subdivided that as well. So essentially, I'm breaking down the broader complex problem into very easy to understand problems, which is what at the core structured thinking is. So how do consultants do this? They use a technique called MISI. This is called mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. You guys would all read a lot about MISI in your consulting preparation. But to quickly summarize what MISI is, MISI is a way to break down a problem into its constituent problems so that collectively they form the entire problem and they don't have any overlaps between each of them. So if you look at this example, the reducing demand for road travel has no overlaps with increasing capacity to handle traffic, but both of these combined answers the entire problem. Like there can't be any third vertical that I can add, which does not fall under these two. So that's how consultants generally break problems. And if you actually have such structured methodology, it just makes it very easier for you to present any sort of problems and solutions to any scene. Right. Cool. With that, I wanted to stop this monologue and wanted to just give you some tips on how to be MISI. Like, look, MISI is a bit difficult for everyone to grasp on the go. The best way to actually become MISI on a daily basis is to just include it in your everyday conversations. You can try to answer a question like, how do you increase vaccine distribution in India right now? How do you solve the oxygen problem in India right now? How can the government increase access to education? How do you solve climate change? So all of these problems, you can try to answer them in a similar way like we did in the Bangalore Bangalore traffic problem case. And once you start answering that in a easy way, essentially what I mean is that all consulting firms would just be behind you. Once you are MECE, everyone will just be behind you. And that's the crux of case interviews. You have to be MECE, and then it's all said and done. With that, I would like to end the intro section and move on to the second section, which is the panel discussion. Cool. So for the panel discussion, we'll have every panelist taking turns in answering various questions. Feel free to, we'll kind of open the floor for everyone as well. But just wanted to get the ball rolling by asking Sanjay first, who's from IIT Bombay, as to how he got interested in consulting. Like what made you want to aim for consulting maybe a year back or a couple of years back?
Thanks a lot, Satya. So I think I'd like to add factors, the genuine factors like the many college seniors you would have actually seen doing like good stuff within your campus. They would start preparing for consult, and they would start preparing for consults since their internship year itself. But there was a very big reason behind it. That is, you have to actually work in a lot of, as you were saying, that don't have to have deep expertise in a single field, but you're gonna be a generalist, and after that you are gonna be exposed to different fields, and you will have interaction with many big people, many big industrialists. And then once you start exploring consulting and the kind of exits that you get from consulting, uh, which can broadly be categorized into four, which is MBA, maybe PE or VC. For some, it can be just continuing consulting, and that is being a part of this industry altogether. And lastly, also entrepreneurial skills that you may develop and eventually have something of your own. So these are the four broad fields that I could identify once you are going to grow within consulting. And after a few discussions, trying to understand if that was actually true. So I think that is actually true altogether, that because that is what consulting firms actually publicize when they'll be holding their PPTs. So yeah, I think that's one major reason behind why I chose to go towards consulting. And also the kind of communication and the kind of skills that you eventually develop. That's all in all together a great addition to your personality.
Really interesting, Sanjay. Dhruv, do you want to maybe build on top of that?
Yeah, sure thing. So I think I mirror Sanjay's opinion in a lot of aspects. But I think just one other thing which was super personal to me is that, I mean, after sort of introspecting, one of the key things which was important to me is I realized that my growth is largely a function of the kind of people around me. And sort of having done my research and my background, it's the kind of consultants is a very challenging and equally enriching atmosphere. So I thought for my career progress, it's great to sort of be surrounded by such smart and to motivated people. So that was another huge reason why I sort of chose to do consulting.
Mayur, do you want to add on top of that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Dhruv here. So, I mean, from our campus, IIT Madras, I've always seen the brightest folks joining all the consulting firms, and it's very competitive to get into and also to survive within consulting in subsequent years. So that is something which will always keep you on the edge and keep you motivated to work harder. So that was the major factor for me. Apart from that, I think as Sanjay mentioned, the exit opportunities is something which is enticing for everyone. So yeah, those are the two things from my end.
Yeah. So quick takeaways would be good talent to work with, good exit opportunities, and obviously, like if it is a very challenging place to get in, and since we are all very ambitious, that's what we want. Moving on to the second basic question. If you remember, one of the steps is to get a resume shortlist. So maybe Basanta, do you want to share a few tips on how to make a killer resume?
Sure. So before going into how to make a killer resume, I think you can look at it or divide it into two parts, right? So first doing things and then writing things, right? So first, before actually, if you have some time, if you're in a third year and you have placements in your fifth year, then I think those students will have to take some time and think about what is it that they want to do and how to get there. So for that, first you need to decide what is the track to becoming a consultant? What are the skills you need to have, or what do people look for in a resume? So then that is the first set. That is the first part of the question. And the second is, once you have done all that, once you're in your summer or fourth year or something, then you go and write stuff down. So I think both parts are very important. So the first part, if you're in your third year or something, what you need to really think about is how do you differentiate yourself from all the 400 or 500 other applicants that are applying from your particular campus? Or how many people are sending emails with their resumes every day, and how do you differentiate yourself from that in the first look itself, right? So if you have a very generic resume with a generic CGPA, with generic positions of responsibilities, not many big awards, no competitions, there has to be some part of your resume that really shines out, and that screams out as soon as you see it, that says, oh, this person has done something really unique. So that could be different for different people. For me, it was positions of responsibilities. For someone, it could be maybe inter IIT or a chess competition or a quiz champion or something. So you have to find first what that is for yourself. And the next part is, how do you highlight it on your resume? How do you make sure that what you did really reflects on your resume, which I think is what the question is for majority of people here. So I have only one tip in that respect, which applies not just for resume making, but for every answer. So talk about situation, action, result. Always give context when you're putting something in a bullet point. Talk about the context, talk about what you have done and what impact did it create on the organization and on your responsibility itself. So if, for example, if you're a secretary, if you just wrote, I scheduled calls for XYZ person, that doesn't make sense, right? That is your job. You're supposed to do that. But if you created a new filing system which reduced the time taken for a particular process from, say, X to X by 10, then that is something that you've added to that position which you have to highlight. So for example, if you're a for example, in your institute, placement coordinator, then you, instead of writing, I handle placement processes for 2000 students, it's better to say maybe by reinventing the process by introducing online recruitments, I increased the number of offers rolled out from 1000 to 2000 within a year. That is what you need to write instead of writing about your job responsibility. So you talked about what was the previous context. There were only 1000 offers. What you did, you introduced online recruitments, and then what was the result? You increased it by 2 times. You made it 2000. So that is what really differentiates what you have done and how you put forward from everybody else.
Super interesting, Vasanta. Like guys, you should notice how Vasanta began her answer. That's a typical consultant in the making. So she said two things: writing and doing, which is messy, right? So that's how you have to answer any question. And like I can see Vasanta already being a consultant based on this. So I'm going to pass on the baton to Subhashri to take a crack at this question.
Yeah, so adding to what Vasanta said, when it comes to the doing part of it, I think it's more important to do what you're passionate about and then excel at it and then put that on your CV instead of doing things just for the sake of getting your CV shortlisted to begin with. So generally with most consulting firms, it's important to have, say, good points on all the buckets in your CV, but it's very important to have a spike, which is a very common term that they do use when it comes to shortlisting. So any portion of your CV should have something that sets you apart from somebody else or anybody else who's applying for that matter, whether it's your extracurriculars or your PORs or academics or anything. For example, say if you play some kind of niche sport or niche instrument, that automatically like attracts the interest of the person who's going to be shortlisting CVs to begin with. And it's also important how you present things on your CV, both content wise in a tactical manner as well as in terms of design. So you need to show what you've done in the best manner possible. So sometimes some people might have done a lot of things, but the way they're putting it forward on their CV might not actually communicate what they're actually done. So that is very important. And apart from that, adding to what Vasanta said, it's very important to bring forward the impact and not the actual task or the job that had to be done.
Super interesting. So what I can hear is that don't just write it for the sake of writing. You have to actually excel at it. And one thing that you have to note, guys, is that like people know what you're writing on your resume. There are a lot of seniors from your same college who would be involved in the sort of entire process. I wouldn't say the shortlisting process, but the overall process. So they know, like, if you have said, like, I've done this, they know what you mean. So actually excel at it and write about that. I'm going to because this is a very important sort of section, I'm going to spend more time on this. I'm going to hand over the baton to Shweta to add a few points.
Thank you, Satya. So just two very quick points. Number one, do not lie on your resume, because they will read your resume. And if you go into an interview, you would be asked to talk about what's on your resume and you do not know what they will ask you. So ensure that whatever you put on your resume, you can have a full-fledged conversation about it with the interviewer. So do not lie, do not bluff. And the second thing is with respect to how an interviewer or a resume verifier actually goes through your resume, they will not spend more than 20 to 30 seconds at max going through your resume, because for each company you would have like hundreds of applicants. Ensure that your resume is concise. You do not have too much stuff going on in your resume, and make sure that every single sentence on your resume is something which adds value to your resume. Do not have redundant sentences. And if possible, try to keep like bolden words or sort of highlight words in a manner that by just looking at your resume, they sort of are able to judge whether this should go through or not. Because like I said, they sort of look at it only for like 20 to 30 seconds. So be very tactical, like Subhashri mentioned, when it comes to designing your resume. Yeah, so that, yeah, just 2 points on my front.
Thanks, Shweta. Nikunj, maybe you want to add some points?
Yeah, so I'll continue with the structure which Vasanta has proposed. I think it's a pretty great structure. All right, so for the doing part, I think most of the points have already been covered, that you try to get involved into things you really like, because as Subhashri said, that you need spikes, right? There could be several highs, but you need to shine out somewhere. You need to have a spike. So make sure you have those spikes. But the more important part is that how to write it. Please do get it verified from your seniors, right? There will be some seniors who have gone into MBB or some consulting firms. So make sure that you have multiple iterations of the resume with them, so that whatever you, because there, right, as Vasanta said, there are several ways of writing the same point. And if you can highlight it as a peak, that only the seniors will be able to tell you in the beginning. We might tell you many points right now, but while drafting it at the later stage, you might forget. So make sure that you are contacting your seniors during that time. Yeah, that was it.
Got it. Thanks, Nikunj. So based on sort of a couple of requests on the chat, I just wanted to loop in Mayur to answer about what are some examples of spikes. Been talking about spikes, but what exactly are they?
So spikes or peaks, as people call them across different campuses, are like, I would say those are the points of excellence which differentiate you from other candidates. So for example, your CV will be divided into a number of sections. Let's say it starts with academics, followed by scholastic achievements, internships, PORs. So there should be something in your internship section which distinguishes you from other applicants. So let's say if you have done some internship which is very coveted or very few people get selected for it, then that is counted as a spike or a peak. If you have a CGPA which is greater than 9, or you have a good department rank, that counts for a peak. Other than that, if you have excelled in something like sports or some extracurricular activities, you play an instrument and you have achieved a lot in that again counts as a peak or a spike. So any form of excellence which differentiates you from other candidates counts as a peak or a spike. And generally firms look for around 3 peaks or spikes in a resume before shortlisting the candidates. So yeah.
Quickly, like, wanted to build on top of that. So I've seen a lot of people considering a few achievements as half a spike, and they say I have 6 half spikes, so I have 3 spikes. That's not how it works. You need to have 3 full-on spikes. So like as Mayur mentioning, like having a 9+ is a full spike, but maybe having a 8+ is not a half spike. So you can't consider 6 half spikes to make it 3 spikes. So please note that as to what are the spikes that you want to showcase in your resume. Cool. I think we spent a lot of time on resume. If there are any questions, there'll be an AMA which will where we can cover this. Wanted to come on the third part. Wanted to ask Nandini on what her case interview prep process was like.
Thanks, Satya. So initially, I think when we first understood how the process was, the first thing that we had to do was make a case group. And that's very important. And I think it's a question here as well, which we'll come to later. Once you make the case group, you start solving cases, but there is a way in which you solve cases. So you don't directly go and ask your seniors first, because that's not going to help you. You could probably do one or two cases with your case group, understand how it actually is, get a feel of it, and then ask your seniors. And after that, you solve cases for, I think, a couple of months. It depends on where you think, how you think you should do. And once you feel that you've had a good taste of it, I think you can stop. And that's when you finally get your interview. So it's a 3-month journey with multiple steps in between.
Got it. Ayushi, do you want to build on top of that?
Sure. So essentially, I'd say that my case interview consisted of 2 major parts. So as Santini said, one major part of it was case solving with the case group that I had. But the other part was essentially me reading about cases and going through my cases and trying to gather knowledge about how a case is ideally solved. So what I used to do is after having every case with my case group, I used to go through the case that I solved thoroughly, see what are my mistakes, and write them down separately, so that at the end of case prep, at the end of maybe doing 7 or 8 cases, I can see what are my major mistakes, what are the mistakes that I'm repeating, and make sure that I do not do that in the further cases, and especially in the interview. Apart from that, I also studied 2 major sources, like theoretically. One was Case Interviews, Case Interview Club. It's a very good book in which you'll get detailed explanation about what are typical cases, how should you communicate in a typical interview. And the other source was craftingcases.com. I think these 2 sources really helped me.
Got it. Subhasri, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, I just wanted to add 2 quick points. The first is, and this is very important and something I started doing at a later stage after my McKinsey buddy told me, which is don't just look at your mistakes, also identify your strengths after solving every single case so that you hold on to those things. And the second thing is 3 things you should do after every single case you solve. One is make sure you asked all the right scoping questions or preliminary questions. The second is to see how structured you were and see if you can be more structured than how you answered the case and whether your structures are messy. And the third is how crisp you were while synthesizing the case and how you gave the recommendations. Yeah, that's
Dhruv, do you want to add to that?
Perfect. So I think very valid points. I just wanted to add 2 more points to the forum. So the first thing is, in a case interview, like Satya said, you're sort of optimizing for 4 things. First, you want to be structured. Second, you sort of want to have good quantitative aptitude, because a lot of cases have numbers in them, and you want to, these numbers aren't like complicated numbers, but you want to ensure that you're able to work through it in some finite time. The third thing you're optimizing for is your communication and presence. So a lot of times what we think we're saying is not what the other person understands. And it's very important in the consulting profession that what you speak and what they understand is largely similar. And the point which I want to index on, which I think a lot of people don't, is business acumen. So business acumen is not something you can gain in a week. It's something to just be in the news about, read the news, just find out what's happening in the world of business, technology. Just start reading now, so that in 6 to 8 months time, when the time actually comes, you have accumulated a significant amount of information, which might sort of come in handy in an interview. So for example, to put it in context, so let's say you're doing a case on why this airline company is losing revenue. So let's say it actually happens that their ticket sales is down. But say you want to quantify it, it always helps to know like what the size of an airplane is, how many seats are there, how many rows are there. You can always ask the interviewer. But coming in with this sort of lateral knowledge of the same industry helps a lot. And these are brownies. So lack of this will not destroy your chances, but the presence of it will vastly improve your chances. So this is one thing which I wanted to add. The second thing, which was something which is very relevant in my context, is most of the time, more isn't better. So like Ayushi said, it's important to spend some time on the case you're doing, understand where you're going right, and understand where you're going wrong as well. So there's this fine balance between being procedural and being creative. So one of the things which I realized when I was doing more and more cases was I was becoming a robot. And I used to record the sessions and watch myself. And it was a little hard to watch sometimes. But you need to sort of strike the right balance by being procedural and being creative. So do come up with these awesome suggestions and at the end, but you also want to optimize for the proceduralness of your interview. So just those 2 points. Thanks.
Got it. Kritika, do you want to take a stab?
Yes, sure.
So again, I think I'd like to stress on the importance about what Dhruv and Ayushi actually said. So it's very important to go forward with the learning that you have from each case. So if I'm spending half hour solving a case, I was definitely spending 1 hour actually going through the case, analyzing what I did wrong, what could have been better, what are the different ways in which this case could be solved, and what are the generic learnings from this case that I could probably apply into other cases of same sort. So that is, I think, one thing is very important and everybody must do. Another thing I feel which is important is that you at times need to realize that there is a slight difference between the cases that you practice and the kind of cases and the type of environment in which you do cases in the interview itself. So say I'm talking about when you're interviewing for these firms, we know that partners are very busy people. Your interviews usually would be very short. So in a 20 minutes interview, you need to create an impression on your interviewer. And those 20 minutes are not only going to include your case, but they're also going to include general conversation that you're going to have with your partner. So in that scenario, what is going to happen is 90% of the time, you're not going to solve the entire case. You're probably going to be cut off by the interviewer in between. So it is important to be prepared for that. It is important to, it's for some people, it comes as a shock. They feel that they were not doing well and they were cut off. So it's important to know about these things. They can happen in the interview. They do not mean that you're not doing well, but they also make you realize that while you're practicing, it's not important to get to the final answer, but it's the process that matters, because a lot of times you're not going to get to the final answer. You're not going to have that much of time. So that is something which is very important, and which also means that while you are practicing, you also need to time your cases while you're doing with your buddies. That is what I wanted to say. Another point that I wanted to highlight was that it's important, after you have done cases with your buddy group, it's important to do some cases with people who are already experienced, who are either in the firm or who have already been through the process. If you have any contacts, if you have any connections, try to explore them, try to pursue them, try to get to do cases with them. If not, eventually after you're going to be shortlisted, you will be allotted buddies. So make the most use of that, because they'll definitely give you great insights which probably your buddies would not be able to give to you, because they haven't been through the entire process which the buddies and other people have. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Kritika. Thanks, everyone. Moving on to the next question on what most of these participants were sort of highlighting on case groups. That's a very, very important aspect of your preparation journey. So you are, as they say, you are the average of the people who surround you. You are the average of your case group. So it's very important to form a good case group and ensure everyone in your group also succeeds. So wanted to ask Adarsh about his experience with his case group and how they managed to try to get everyone successful. Yeah.
Right. So this is not something that's very particular. You don't have a set rule as such. Everyone has their different opinions. So I'll just go about how I did mine. So I had two case groups, and the first one was with a group of friends whom I knew very well, and whom I trust a lot. And the second group was with a group of people who hadn't interacted with much. And the reason we form case groups is that we can collectively practice together and collectively grow together. And that's what's crucial for the success as well. It's very important that you give, you practice giving cases as well as doing cases. So you need to be a good interviewer as well as a good interviewee. And it's after the end of the case, it's very important to discuss the feedback and discuss then there itself if there's any way we could have done the case better. Right. And also, like over the course, it's very important for the case group to be very consistent. A lot of time it so happens that people change case groups or, stop doing cases for some time. But consistency is the key for landing your dream job.
Thanks, Adarsh. So I'm going to pass the baton to Shweta, who was part of one of the most successful case groups I knew of. So I'm going to pass it on to her.
Thank you, Satya. So I've been very lucky with respect to my case group. My two case group members are on the panel here, Dhruv and Mayur. So yeah, I think we ended up pretty well. But I would just like to give 3 main tips with respect to forming the case group. Number 1, ensure that your case group members are as enthusiastic and as serious as you are about consulting. you want them to be as motivated as you are, and you want to know that, they will stick to the regimen which you want to adopt for yourself. So that's rule number one. The second thing is you want them to be extremely honest with you and extremely brutal about feedback. You don't want anyone sugarcoating how you perform, because these are the people who would actually help you grow. And this is one of the most important aspects of case prep. So ensure that you can tell them how they do things honestly, and that they will also be honest with you about how you perform. And the third thing is, you just have to get along. You might have achieved points 1 and 2, but if you just are not a huge fan of the person, or you don't like that person so much, it's going to be hard, because your case group is going to be your moral support for the months before placement. And at least in our case, it was extremely important, because we managed to stick together for the entire period of 4 months. And there will be times when you would be a bit stressed, you would be worried, you won't know how to sort of slot the various companies, you don't know where to go first. Your case group will help with all of this. So ensure that you sort of get along well and you guys like each other. So I think these are like the 3 key things I would ask you to focus on when you're deciding who you should form a case group with.
Thanks, Shweta. Nikunj, maybe do you want to add something?
Yeah, right. So, so firstly, there is no formula to finding the right case group, right? And I believe that it's better to have diversified case group, because every individual has a different way of solving cases, of different way of thinking. So the more the number of smart people, you obviously focus on smart, because you want to do cases with people who can very perfectly analyze you. So the more the number of people you do cases with, the more insights you get about yourself. Because right, if you do cases with a particular case group, let's say you solve 100 cases in one case group, then you'll become robotic, right? They'll give you the same perspective, you'll give them the same perspective, so that won't help you that much. So solve with as many people as you can, and definitely they should be enthusiastic. Also, try, as Kritika said, try to do cases with the alums, right? Alums or people who have got into MBB, because they know what the interviewer is looking for, right? Because you'll come, when you do cases, you'll realize that there are multiple correct answers, right? You just have to be structured. You should. And one more thing I would like to emphasize on is first principle thinking. I think Satya started with that. So they do not want you to give a robotic answer, right? There could be a simple structure you could have memorized, and you would just replicate that in the interview. They would rather focus more on first principle thinking, that how good are you able to think on the spot, right? Assuming they give you a random question, how good are you able to think, how structurally you are able to think, and that will be determined by the type of people you do cases with. So make sure that it is diversified, and as Shweta said, they should be very enthusiastic, because if their enthusiasm is low, then your enthusiasm you will just replicate them. So make sure they are diversified and enthusiastic.
Thanks, Nikunj. Kritika, you want to add a few points?
Yes, I think most of the important things they've already covered, but one thing that I wanted to say was that typically in some campuses, the resume shortlisting, you have to start forming case groups when the resume shortlist is not yet out. So you actually don't know who is going to be in the process and who is not going to be in the process. So try and form groups with people who you feel are more likely to get shortlisted, so that eventually you have people to practice with. Because I've seen a lot of job groups crumbling like this. There are 4 people, only 1 gets shortlisted, so they eventually don't have people to practice with. So you have to think it through a little. Sometimes people are very smart, people may be very good to practice with, you may have a great learning experience, but if you feel that they won't get shortlisted, then in the long run that might hurt you a little. So yeah.
Got it. Right. So in the interest of time, we're going to move to the 5th question. And this is something that is very, very important, because like scoring an interview off campus is very, very difficult. So I'm going to pass it on to Aditya to answer this question.
Thank you so much, Satya. Happy to answer that question. So to give you all some perspective as to why I'm the right person to answer this, I'm from NIT Trichy, and I landed an offer at Bain, like off campus. So before talking about like my journey as to how I landed the interview, I'll set the context right. So with respect to all of the consulting companies out there, there are a few who have like open applications, like through like their portals and everything. I think Dalberg is like an example of that, where they have like every year they have like an analyst open position which you can just go to the portal and apply. But if I were to specifically talk about vacancy bay and BCG, the only way that you can get in is by getting a referral and by actively networking, right? So when it comes to networking, I would say there are two kinds of people. One, I call them, they spray and pray when it comes to networking. They send hundreds and hundreds of messages to hundreds of people on LinkedIn and just pray that one person, refers them. That's like one segment. But on the other hand, the other group of people focus on quality and they don't play the volume game. They focus on the quality of the relationships that they have and they focus on building that relationship over a period of time. So that being said, I'll talk about like my personal experience. So I was the president of 180 Degrees Consulting in NIT Trichy, which is a consulting club. And through that, for the past like 2 years, we've been actively networking with a lot of consultants. Through that, I met an alum. And throughout 2 years, we've been focusing on, networking with him like on a professional front with respect to the club also. And a personal standpoint, I used to ask him a lot of doubts about my career, what kind of career paths that I should get into, a lot of things. Right? So within 2 years, we became like super close. And towards the end, once he realized that I'm like very, very passionate about consulting and I have the potential to get into the company, he agreed to refer me. So this was my experience throughout. And I would say there are 3 major takeaways for me throughout this experience. So I don't want you all to just blindly copy whatever I did. There's no like one defined path. But if there are 3 takeaways, it would be that. The first one being that you need to be very, very authentic when it comes to networking and don't be super opportunistic. Don't get into a conversation expecting someone to just refer you. I network for the sake of learning. I want to just learn about the different aspects of consulting, how consultants really think. That was just my attitude towards it. And towards the end, I was able to like land an offer, which was well and good. So that's the first thing. Be super authentic about it and don't be just opportunistic, right? The second point is that when you're networking, keep in mind that you should also add value to your network or to the other person who you're talking to. It should not just be like one way. A lot of things that you can do, but there's something that you need to think about based on your environment and which university you're from. So a simple example from my end would be that the alum that I spoke about who referred me, I think a year back, we flew him down to campus and he conducted a seminar and everything, but we helped him relive his memories on campus, right? So this is like a very, very small thing that we did for him, which made him feel like really happy and everything. And it goes a long way when it comes to relationship building. So the point being, try to add some value, anything, when you're networking. The third point being, focus on quality of the relationships that you build and not on quantity. If you go out and reach to 100 people and expect like one person to refer you, that is not going to work. And I don't promote that kind of behavior either. So just make sure that even if there's like one person who you're really close to, invest in the building that relationship. So I think these 3 would be the 3 biggest takeaways for me.
Thanks, Aditya. That was really, really informative. I'm going to pass it on to Sanjay, who has a few points to add as well.
Thanks a lot, Satya. So out here, majorly whatever Aditya spoke about was quite similar for me. Even though I could get I could crack Bain through my campus interview process itself. But other than that, I also had an interview at Dalberg, which was an application that opened up on its website itself. So I think there are 3 factors that you need to take into account. That is different companies, you need to check the portals regularly. Secondly, you need to check the websites, LinkedIn job postings. Because out there, many a times you're going to miss on many opportunities. And out there, the openings, they would close within a day or 2, right? Other than that, also keep yourself posted to the pages, the LinkedIn pages of these different companies, because many a times a few firms, they'll open up a few internship opportunities which are going to convert into associate or analyst positions, which is permanent roles eventually. And you really don't get to see these on job applications on LinkedIn either. And lastly, as Aditya spoke, you need to actually network a lot. You need to network with many people because that's the best way. In fact, most of my friends who have entered in any management consulting firm, or rather, in fact, even into IB firms or PE or VC firms, it has been through networking. And that eventually is going to help you get something good.
Awesome. Guys, thanks everyone for answering these 5 basic questions. I'm sure everyone has a lot of burning questions. So I'm going to move to the next segment. Let's spend about 20-25 minutes on this, where we take questions from you folks. So please log into menti.com, use the code on your screen. There are already a few questions there. You can vote on those questions, or you can just ask your own questions. People just vote any question that you would want to be answered. If there's any question that's already there, don't add a new question. This creates a lot of duplicacy. So yeah, just go out there and fill in your questions. Guys, you can see the code at the top of your screen right now. Okay, I see a few questions coming in. A lot of people liking the first question. Maybe we get started with this then as people fill in questions. So Ayushi, maybe you want to jump in and probably share how your actual interview experience was like. Any anecdotes that helped you be memorable in your interview?
Okay, so before just getting into this, I'd like to say that my actual interview experience might be a lot different than most of the panelists present here. Why I say so is because like the interview day, I was shortlisted to 3 consulting firms, the 3 major consulting firms that come in IIT Bombay, Bain, BCG, and ADK. And I had to choose which firm, which slot would I get into first. So I first got into Bain, and I had like 5 interviews with Bain, one after the other, which is a huge number because generally people get selected in 3 interviews, 2-3 interviews generally. Because of this, I was not able to interview for BCG and ATK, so it was like either Bain or nothing at all. But luckily, I got into Bain, and that is a good thing. About my interviews, I'd say that the first 3 interviews that I had were essentially cases. I got 2 guesstimates, which also is a little weird because people generally get 1 guesstimate, a profitability case or an unconventional case. My first 2 interviews were a guesstimate case. They were pretty simple, and I think I did well. Coming to my third interview, it wasn't a case at all actually, and it wasn't even a PI sort of an interview. We kind of discussed on the current situation of the Indian economy, and I just had a discussion with my interviewer, who was a manager. The other 2 interviews that I have were again, PI interviews, you can say, or just discussions about business to check my business acumen by the partners of the firm. So that was my experience in the interview.
Thanks, Ayushi. For the next question, 28 people have liked this. Like, how do you track your case solving process? I see Vasanta has raised her hand, so maybe I'll pass it on to her.
Yeah. Thanks, Satya. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, so I had this way that I discovered after like 2 or 3 weeks into my case prep process. So I had this Excel sheet, right? On the first column, I had the case title. What case was it? The second column, I had the person that I solved the case with. Was it a student, alumnus, or my case group person, or someone totally outside, whatever. And the third column, I think it was basically what questions. So after every case, right, when you're going over the case, it's best to tabulate what you've done. So I used to just quickly write down the preliminary questions if I covered everything or not, and then I used to write about the structure. So if I used a mathematical formula to solve the case, then I used to write that. Or if I used building blocks. So this is something that you'll figure out later, but what kind of structure. And lastly, the mistakes that I made, or at least what was pointed out. So I used to keep this, and at the end of my case prep, I had a list of about 60 or 70 cases and guesstimates on this Excel sheet, which I went through, and I had all my mistakes, all the kind of cases that I solved, what kind of case it is. Was it a profitability case, or was it what category does it fall in? All of that in one Excel sheet, which really, really helped me in keeping track of my progress. So that was one way that I solved. But if anybody else has any great ideas, then please share.
Thanks, Vasanta. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on. So the next question, which has got a lot of likes, is what are some major sources? I think this can be better covered. You can just share a list rather than just answering it here. Might help you guys also save it in a better way. Right. Any takers of this question? Who? What are the major differences between consulting firms? And probably you could also cover how cases in each of these firms are a bit different. Vasanta, I see your hand raised. You want to go for this? Mayur, yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So I will answer this from the perspective of the interviews. So typically, so my interview experience with BCG was a very short one. My process ended in 1.5 hours. I had 3 interviews with BCG, and at the end of third interview, I got the offer. All 3 interviews were largely case-based. So I mean, there was very little personal interview part, and in all 3 cases, about 20 to 25 minutes, I had to solve the case. However, at other firm, like for example, McKinsey focuses a lot on the personal interview aspect. I think Vasanta or Dhruv might be able to add more to it, but I think about half of their interview is focused on the personal interview part, and less of it focuses on the case. And I think at Bain, as far as I know, the interviews are quite open-ended. The problem statements or the cases which people solve during interviews are they give you a lot of opportunity to get creative there. So with regard to the interviews, these are the differences which I observed. This could also be specific to our campus, IIT Madras. There could be differences across different campuses or different recruitment procedures. So yeah, anyone else would like to add something here?
Yeah, Shweta, go ahead.
Yeah, so just adding another layer of granularity. So I interviewed with BCG, and I had 3 rounds, after which I got the offer. And all the 3 rounds, it was pretty conventional cases or guesstimates. So there wasn't anything unconventional. So when you are practicing cases, you'd sort of come across profitability, market entry, and type cases. Then you would have an unconventional case. In BCG, it was conventional. In McKinsey, in all the 3 of my rounds, I had like unconventional cases. So in terms of the types of cases, in respect to our campus and with respect to my experience, I found this distinction between McKinsey and BCG.
Thanks, Shweta. For the next question, I think we covered a lot on how do you maximize getting a shortlist.
Satya,
yeah, Nikunj, go ahead.
Sorry to barge in. I don't want the participants to get the wrong information. So I think it's very interviewer dependent as well as campus dependent, right? So I think because Swetha might have encountered interviewers who are more into conventional, but I had 6 BCG rounds and 3 of them were unconventional. So basically, it's very interviewer dependent, and you should practice all kinds of cases. So basically, whatever they throw at you, you should be able to answer. So there is no one fixed formula for a company.
Thanks, Nikunj. For the next question, no, you don't have to have a consulting internship. You just have to have an internship which speaks about any difference that you made, which shows your leadership and which is slightly unique, and that helps you differentiate yourself. But of course, if you have a consulting internship, obviously it's a positive, but I wouldn't just aim for that. Right. Anyone wants to take a crack at this? Like, just highlight some internships that might help people. Yeah, Dhruv, go ahead.
Sure. I think this is a very broad question, and it is different for different campuses and different companies. But essentially, you want to optimize for 2 things again. One, when you're talking about internships, brand matters. Second, work matters. So in your internship, if you're able to maximize or do phenomenal work, that's great. Or if you go to a brand, that's great as well. So you, in your resume, whenever you're opting for internships, try and see if you can peak out in one of these places. If you are not maximizing brand or not maximizing work, then it's probably not in your consulting best interest. That's it.
Yeah, thanks for keeping it short, Dhruv. Right. So any takers for this? Is there a way to practice alone? I wouldn't recommend practicing alone because it's not a real life simulation. But please wait until the end of the session. There is a way for you to form your case groups even without having 2 people interested in your college. We'll announce a program. Cool. Right. I think the next question is an interesting one. I think Dhruv covered it slightly, but let's hear from Shweta.
I think this depends a lot on the person, but at any point of time, if you start feeling burnt out and if you are beginning to hate case solving, or if you're realizing that you're each day as you keep doing cases, it's not getting any better, at that point, it's time for you to just take a pause, take a break, and get back to it once you're refreshed. So it's up to you completely.
Mayur, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just adding on to that, I mean, it varies from person to person. So I did not feel burnt out, or I did not feel that I have done too much at any point. So some people after solving 50 to 60 cases feel that, okay, it's getting monotonous or it's getting robotic, but it varies from person to person. I did not feel that, or rather I felt the need to stay in touch with the cases just before my interviews. So many people stop doing cases entirely like 10, 15 days before the interview so that they retain their creative juices for the day of interview. However, for me, I felt that it was important to stay in touch with the cases which I have solved before or practice newer cases. So I kept solving cases till, let's say, the very last day. Yeah.
Got it. Thanks, Mayur. So for the next question, it's a very, very good question, I would say. Subhashi, do you want to take it?
Yeah, so I don't think CGPA matters that much if you have other things that cover up for it. So if the other buckets on your CV are very strong, your internships, your positions of responsibility, your extracurricular activities, then it doesn't really matter what your CGPA is as long as it's not very low. Otherwise, yes, CGPA does matter, but it's fine if it's above an 8.
Got it. So I can personally share anecdote. So there was a guy in my batch who had less than 7 CGPA, but he had so many other things on his resume, which actually explained why he had such a less CGPA. So like actually doing good in academics is not the end of everything, but you just have to have a lot of things that explain why your CGPA is low. Maybe you are a national level sports champion. Maybe you have aced it in all your extracurriculars or your co-curricular activities. So you just have to have a good story to tell and a balance that you have to say. Okay. Any takers for this question? I think there were a lot of people who were asking on what are the technical skills. Just for a quick answer, there's no need for any technical skills like all your R, theta, coding, and all of that. That is not required in consulting, to be very, very clear. But you do need to have the typical case solving skills, because case solving is generally a simulation of the actual consulting project. So no technical skills per se. You can put business acumen under technical skills if you want to, but essentially that's what it is. Right. I think we answered this. Guys, we'll spend 5 more minutes on this section. So just look through the questions that you want answered the most and keep upvoting them so that we can just cover those very quickly.
Yes, Satya, I think one thing which we can cover is what's it like doing a case interview process in a pandemic.
Yeah.
Right. How does things change? Maybe you can go over that. So I'll just take the lead. So I think we were the first batch where the entire interview process happened online from the start. And I think initially alarm bells were ringing. So thinking things like, are consulting companies hiring? Should I actually put in the effort? Do I have a good chance at it? And I think that same thought might come in even now. But if you observe the news from all the consulting companies, this year might in fact be the largest year for them. Because if you put yourself in a consulting company's shoe, chaos is usually where business comes for consulting companies. If there's a lot of change happening in the industry and things are going out of hand, the first people they call are consulting companies. So business is good when times are tough, if that makes sense. So first off, like, don't think that consulting companies aren't coming. The next thing is, I think the entire process switching to virtual, the only place where you might think alarm bells might ring is during the actual interview itself. But I think we've spent quite a bit of time online to know how online interviews and online meetings happen. So I think you should rest assured that things aren't lost. But the one thing which I will sort of double down on is your communication. So when you are in front of someone else, there's a lot of softer communication channels which are open, things like body language, how you are reacting to a question, so to speak, and reading cues even of the interviewer. But when they're sort of happening online, it's a lot more toned down. So in the sense, you need to be a lot more cognizant of what you are saying and a lot more cognizant of how much time you're taking to convey a specific point. Because after a point, online, I mean, face-to-face is hard to get boring, but online it's very easy to sort of get bored out. And I think I have reached that 1 minute time where my answer is getting too long. So I'll keep it short. So just keep your answer short, to the point, and I'm sure there's no other difference between online and offline. Yep.
Yeah. Thanks, Dhruv. So I would like to add one more to it. I can just give my own example. When I was interviewing, I was taking an interview online. I was doing 10 different things as well. I was responding to my emails. I was making a deck, etc. So from an interviewer point of view, when it's online, they tend to do a lot of things. They're not completely in the zone. So you have to be on point in your communication. You have to become memorable. You have to drive their attention towards you. So yeah, just focus a lot on that. Okay, I think we have exhausted a lot of these questions and we have covered most of the topics. So I'm going to quickly switch back to the presentation. Right. We were thinking of taking a 5-minute break, but maybe we don't have a lot of time. Maybe we just continue, but feel free to just take a break if you want to. Right. So the next section, just wanted to give a quick heads up. We're going to solve one particular type of case, which is guesstimates, which is where you tend to begin with in your case solving journey. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly walk you through how you solve any type of guesstimates, and then you guys would solve it real time along with the panelists as well. Right. So the typical format for any guesstimates question is that you have to estimate the number of anything, number of smartphones, number of cows in India, number of vaccines currently being delivered in India, like anything like that is a typical format of any guesstimate question. And from looking at it, like it seems very intimidating, right? Like how can you even estimate the number of smartphones? Like that's going to be a huge number, can be anything, I don't even know. But just don't get intimidated. There's a very easy 5-step process in which you can kind of solve this. So just lay down the 5 steps. So first step is just try to understand the scope of the problem. Like when anyone says estimate the number of cows in India, are you asking about even calves, or is it just only the full-grown cows? So you just have to understand what exactly is the scope of the problem. So don't get intimidated. Just try to break the exact question and try to see what else details can you get from that question. It can make your life essentially easier, right? So the next step is that you break down the problem again into different constituents, the typical MECE way, right? So if I ask about number of people who smoke cigarettes in India, maybe the breakdown would be across different age groups, right? Like that's a MECE way, and you can see. So that's a typical breakdown. The third step, which is a very, very important step, is that you to actually land at the number of people who smoke cigarettes, you need to identify a familiar metric, right? Like say a familiar metric to you is the population of India, right? Obviously, the population of any country or the number of people smoking in any country is directly proportional to the population of that country, right? So there is a relationship that you can draw from these two. So if you're hit with any guesstimate, the step 3 or the most important step is that you need to identify a familiar metric, like something that you are very, very familiar with, and something that is say directly proportional to your end outcome, right? That is your third step. The fourth step is that just write down the equation, like how are they two related? Like what is the direct proportionality that we are talking about, right? And then the fifth is put your assumptions, like whatever you write down in the equations, you put your assumptions and then you calculate and you sort of present the results. Right. So this might seem a lot, but I have a very short example to run you through, and then there'll be a live case demonstration as well, where you guys will understand how these 5 different steps work. Okay. So I've just put a very, very basic estimate. Like this is something that you guys will solve in the first week of your case solving process, right? So estimate the number of smartphones sold in India. So in the scope, we all know what a smartphone is, but it's good to understand how are we defining it a smartphone. Like, is it because it has 3G connection? Is it because it has 4G connection? Is it because it has a touch screen? Is it because it's not BlackBerry? I mean, have to figure that out. Like, that's the basic question. So when we say smartphones sold in India each year, so sold by whom, sold where, in urban, in rural. So there are multiple questions that can be derived from this first statement, right? Just try to understand, ask them out. So one thing to remember is that even though you feel like whatever you're asking is very dumb, you just ask anyway, because it just helps you align with the interviewer, right? The next step obviously is structure. Split it into a MECE way. So total smartphones sold can be like smartphones bought by your rural and your urban. This is the MECE kind of classification. Rural, urban have no intersections, and they both sort of fill up your entire pie. That's essentially what MECE is. Then the third one, which is the proxy, right? The number of smartphones sold in India is directly proportional to your population. So I am very familiar with India's population. So I'm going to take that as my proxy metric, which can be linked to my smartphones. The fourth thing, what I would do is write an equation, right? Like how is the population sort of linked to your total smartphone sold? So I've written down a very basic equation both for rural and urban. So I've assumed that, okay, only people above 14 years may use smartphone. And this is something that you can check with the interviewer as well. But the total population into percentage of population who are eligible to use smartphones, into percentage of population who can afford to use smartphones, into the average smartphones per person, right? Divided by the average frequency of purchase. Like everyone would not purchase smartphones in here. So this is a very simple equation which links your proxy metric to your outcome guesstimate. So if you look at this equation, this is something that you want, this is something that you know, and these are something that you can take an assumption. Like I can know ki percentage of population above 14 years can be roughly 60, 65, 70%. Like that is something that I can know. So in your equation, link your outcome guesstimate to your proxy metric by taking factors which you can take an assumption later on. So the step 5, just make assumptions. So just clarify your assumptions with the interviewer. Okay, I'm going to take 60, 65%, 70% of the of population, and then your calculation. So the very hard, intimidating estimate can be made very easy by using these 5 very, very simple steps. And if you do this, there's no way you're going to mess up estimates. Cool. So that is about that. So, I mean, listening is one thing, but it's always better to do. Right? So we'll be sending you out into breakout rooms in groups of 15 where you will be joined by a panelist. But before that, I just wanted to pass it on to Subhashri, who would like to add something about Cases for Change.
Thank you, Satya, for giving me the floor. So coming to Cases for Change, I'll be speaking about what it is, why we started it, and what we do. So my friend and incoming analyst at Bain and I started Cases for Change to raise funds to augment India's oxygen supply through mentoring individuals to break into consulting. So you guys must have heard about organizations like the Hemkund Foundation and Khalsa Aid India. If you haven't, they're doing amazing work in providing oxygen cylinders and concentrators free of cost to critical COVID patients, especially those that can't that don't have access to hospital beds with oxygen support. So coming to the kind of sessions we have a case solving session where your mentor will guide you through the entire case process, and you decide the difficulty of the case and the nature of the case that you want to solve, whether it's profitability, market entry, unconventional, or a guesstimate. And post you solve the case, the mentor will provide you with detailed feedback. And even if you haven't started your case solving process yet, I would still suggest you apply, because it would give you a jump start when you do start preparing, and would give you, say, clarity or a clear direction as to how to proceed. Moving to the CV review session, the mentor would provide you with suggestions or changes based on what profile you're interested in, whether it's consulting, marketing, finance, etc. And changes are suggested in terms of your content or strategic changes or the design itself, helping you present your achievements in a better manner so that you can maximize your chances of getting shortlisted. And the last two sessions are just to walk you through the entire process of landing a job at a consulting company or an internship, whether it's on or off campus, and your mentor would guide you through the preparation and the selection procedure, etc. The sessions can be either one-on-one or in groups. You get to decide that, and you will find more information about the same on our social media handles. And finally, coming to who our mentors are, we're all a part of the incoming cohort at McKinsey, Bain, and BCG. A few of us are on the panel here today: Dhruv, Mayur, Vasanta, Aditya, and I. And there are a couple of us apart from this as well. That's it from me. Thank you for giving me the time, and do check.
Great. Am I audible?
Yes, Dhruv, you are. Go ahead.
Perfect. So while Sid sort of starts pushing people into breakout rooms, so just one interesting opportunity which we have. So we wanted to make the breakout rooms slightly more lively. So, and also sort of do a good deed in the process. So the three of us, Cases for Change, 180 Degrees Consulting, IIT Madras, and Relay Campus, will sort of sponsor one person who is nominated from each breakout room and sort of donate on their behalf so that they can be part of the Cases for Change cohort. And so the only prerequisite is sort of you add value to the meeting, the breakout rooms, contribute your thoughts, and yeah, proactively learn. So on that note, Sid, could you please sort of create these 12 breakout rooms and sort of divide equally?
I think they're all
Yeah,
open.
so you can start. Perfect. So great. I think all the panelists are back. So I hope your session was sort of productive. Sorry if it was a little rushed, but I think the intention was to give you a flavor of what's to come. I think all of us on the panel are more than happy to take time out and answer further questions. I think good place to start would be to sign up for Cases for Change. But beyond that as well, please do write into us and we'll be happy to help. So I think on that note, let's just move into the summary. So who has control of the slides? Just push forward. Awesome. So thank you so much for sort of staying on. What we'll do now is to just recap what we have learned thus far. So the first thing we learned is like management consulting is sort of high impact, high growth profession, and you have a framework to evaluate whether you might be the right fit for the job. The second thing which is important to take away is that there's a clear emphasis on four things. First would be structured thinking. Second would be communication and presence. Third would be quantitative aptitude. And fourth would be business acumen. And this is a great place to start when evaluating your case performance. So even if you evaluate yourself on these four criterion, that's a great place to start. And finally, few case interview tips. First, every assumption made should be explicitly stated and have a logical basis. Second, I think it's a great rule of thumb is to be roughly right than precisely wrong. So have smart approximations at each stage. Third, it's very important to strike the right balance between being a robot and being an artist. So being procedural versus being creative. Fourth, it's important to understand that a case interview is a simulation. It's good to understand what the other person on the other end wants and then build that back into your technique. Finally, I mean, last but not the least, it's important to always cut to the chase. Value first, always go bottoms up. The client is interested in the answer, not as much in your approach. And finally, things do go wrong in case interviews. It's always cool to take a moment, take a step back, take your time and take stock and then proceed further. So I think that's the key takeaways we were able to sort of summarize from the session. We can push forward here. Yeah, so I think we are at the end of the session. So just a few things to keep in mind. So we will be organizing more follow-up sessions. In case you'd like to be in touch, please scan the QR code, follow our LinkedIn page, and we will be the first to know when we have further sessions. Pushing forward.
Right.
Satya,
guys, thanks so much for staying on. Hope you had a good experience. Just wanted to inform you folks that Relay Campus would be launching a 6-week bootcamp for consulting and product management as well later this year, maybe in June, July, when the actual preparation and the placement season kicks in. So there will be 4 aspects of our program. You would have your structured learning journey. There's so much content out there in the internet, so many books, so many blog posts. We would synthesize all of that and put it in a structured way so that it's best for you. Then we would have mentorship from top professionals, people who have stayed in McKinsey BCG for at least 2 to 3 years, so that you get actual real life consulting fun days and what they look for in case interviews. There would be a community of motivated peers from best colleges. As I keep mentioning, you are the average of the people around you. So that's something that we strive to achieve. And this is not so much for consulting, but more for product management. We would have real life projects that would help you boost your resume as well. There were a lot of questions in the chat today and generally as to how do you form case group? Like you don't have any of your friends who are also gunning for consulting. So in our program, we would be giving you a case group. We hope to be very scientific this time. Like if you can match someone on dates, if you can match someone for other, you can match case groups as well. In fact, there were 5 people in our panelists, 5 panelists today who were part of the Relay Campus cohort last time. So we would be giving you case groups as well, so that it would help you prepare your better. So you can check out more details on our website, relaycampus.com, and we hope to be in touch with you. Handing over to Subhashri again.
I don't have anything to add, just that you guys can scan the QR code to the left for more details regarding the sessions and for registering. And even if you aren't going to sign up, I would still urge you to donate to these organizations. They're doing an amazing job and they are saving lives. So do donate. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm just going to leave this. I'm just going to leave this here so that you guys can and visit the page. And thanks so much everyone for joining. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Great. So I think on that note, we can end the session. Thank you so much for joining in. I hope you guys leave with some value add and a great start to your consulting prep journey. Awesome. See you guys. Bye.